I want to say up front that I'm not the kind of person who believes in things. I've worked nights my whole adult life, and when you work nights, you learn that most of what scares people is just tired brains filling in the dark with whatever's handy. A shadow is a coat rack. A voice is the ice maker cycling. A footstep is the building cooling down after a hot day. I know all of that. I've talked more than one guest down off a ceiling because they heard something in the wall and were sure it was a person. So when I tell you the ice machine at the Blue Vista started giving me room keys instead of ice, I need you to understand that I looked for the boring answer first. I looked for it for a long time. I'm only telling this the way it happened because I finally ran out of boring answers. And what was left is the thing I still can't put down. The first key it gave me belonged to a room that burned down before I ever worked there. Room 117. That room isn't on the building anymore. There's no door, no window, no number. There's a stretch of newer siding and a soda machine bolted over where it used to be, but the key was in my hand, cold and wet, with a plastic tag melted halfway down one side, and somebody had used it recently enough that the metal still smelled like somebody's pocket. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell it in order, because the order is part of what makes it wrong. The Blue Vista Motor Lodge sits about 1.5 miles off the state highway, past the truck scales in a part of the country where the towns are mostly gas stations and the gas stations are mostly closed. It's a single-story L shape, the kind of place built in the 60s when people still drove for the pleasure of it. 28 rooms, doors facing the parking lot, a vacancy sign out front with a V that flickers so you can't tell if it says vacancy or acancy. The parking lot is old asphalt gone gray, cracked into a map of nothing, patched in a few places with black tar that never quite dried. There's a laundry room at the elbow of the L, a front office with a night bell, and between the office and the first block of rooms, there's the machine room, a little cinder block alcove with a vending machine, a snack machine that eats quarters, and the ice machine. I took the overnight desk because it paid a little more than the day shift, and because I needed the money more than I needed to see the sun. My marriage had come apart the slow way, the way a motel comes apart. One small failure at a time until you look up and the whole thing is water-stained. I moved into a rented room in town, and I took 11 at night to 7 in the morning, 5 nights a week, and I told myself it was temporary. That was 2 years before any of this started. Nothing at the Blue Vista is temporary. That's the first thing the place teaches you. The owner is a man named Roy Petrak. He inherited the motel from his father, and he runs it the way you run something you're waiting to sell, just enough to keep it breathing. Roy is in his 60s, heavy, quiet, wears the same 2 flannel shirts, turned inside out to hide the stains. He's not a bad man. He's a tired man who decided a long time ago that the less he knew about his own motel, the better he'd sleep. You'll understand why that matters later. The day shift manager is a woman named Carol, and the housekeeper, who's been there longest, is named Alma. Alma's been cleaning those rooms since before Roy's father died. She's small and slow, and she doesn't waste words, and the maintenance we get is from a man named Denny, who comes when he feels like it and charges Roy for a full day, no matter how long he stays. Those 4 people, Roy, Carol, Alma, Denny, are most of the world at the Blue Vista, and the rest of the world checks in after dark and is gone before I finish my coffee. My job is simple, and I was good at it. I checked people in. I ran the card machine, which fails about 1 time in 5, so I know how to write a receipt by hand. I kept the registry, which Roy still keeps on paper in addition to the computer, because his father did, and because the computer is older than some of the guests. I watched the security monitor, a single screen that cycles through 6 cameras, 4 of which work. I dealt with the complaints, which at that hour are always the same. The AC is loud. The room smells like smoke. The people next door are fighting. There's no ice. The ice was my responsibility in the sense that I was the one who heard about it when there wasn't any. The machine is old, a big stainless commercial unit, and it has a mind. Some nights it fills the bin so full the door won't shut. Some nights it sulks and gives you a handful of wet chips. Denny had fixed it 4 or 5 times, which mostly meant he hit it and left. There's a bucket you're supposed to use, and a scoop chained to the wall so people don't steal it, and a drain in the floor that backs up when it rains. That room floods a little every spring. There's a permanent tide line on the cinder block about 6 inches up, a brown ring like the inside of an old coffee cup. I mentioned the tide line because later I couldn't stop looking at it. The machine room is loud. The ice maker hums and drips, and every 20 minutes or so it dumps a fresh batch with a sound like someone emptying a drawer of silverware onto concrete. You get used to it. On the monitor, there's a camera that covers the machine room doorway, camera 3, and it's the one that works worst. It drops frames, so people walking past move in little jumps, like a flip book with pages missing. Roy never fixed it because, as he put it, nothing worth stealing has ever been in that room. So now you know the place. Let me tell you about the first night. It was late fall, a Tuesday, dead. I had 4 rooms occupied out of 28. Rain earlier in the evening had stopped and left the lot shining, and the trucks were coming through in long, spaced-out waves, the way they do late, headlights sweeping the office wall and then gone. Around 2 in the morning, a guest from room 9 came to the office and rang the bell and told me the ice machine was broken again. It was making noise, but nothing was coming out. I said I'd look at it. That's the whole job sometimes, saying you'll look at it. I took the bucket and went out. The neon buzzed. The machine room light was doing its slow strobe, the fluorescent tube on its way out, and the machine was running loud. That full batch rattle, building up to a dump. I put the bucket under the chute and hit the paddle. What came out wasn't ice. It was a key. A real key. A brass motel key. The old kind with a big diamond-shaped plastic fob. The kind we stopped using years before my time, except for the handful of rooms where the electronic locks never got installed. It landed in the bucket with a flat clack. It was wet. It was cold, colder than the room. Cold the way ice is cold. And there was a skin of frost on the fob that melted while I was looking at it. The fob said 117. I want to be honest about what I thought because it's important. I did not think ghost. I thought, someone dropped a key down the chute as a joke. I thought, this key fell behind the machine years ago and finally worked its way loose. I thought, 117, we don't have a 117. Our rooms only go to 128. But there's no 117 on the L. The numbering skips. And I stopped because I realized I didn't actually know why the numbering skipped. I'd worked there 2 years, and I'd never once wondered why we went from 116 to 118. You don't wonder about the missing number. You wonder about the guest who won't pay. I brought the key back to the office and set it on the desk and gave the guest in 9 some ice from the little freezer we keep behind the counter for exactly these nights. Then I sat and looked at the key. The frost was gone by then, but the fob was still cool, and the plastic was strange. One side was normal, faded red, and the other side was warped and darkened, bubbled like it had been too close to a flame and pulled back at the last second. It smelled faintly of smoke, not cigarette smoke. The other kind. the kind that gets into wood. I checked the key box. This is the wooden box behind the desk, with the little hooks, one per room, where we hang the physical keys for the rooms that still use them. There's no hook for 117. There's a gap in the row where a hook would go, an unpainted rectangle on the board a shade lighter than the wood around it, with 2 empty screw holes. Something used to hang there. I'd looked at that board 1,000 nights and never seen the gap until I was looking for it. I put the key in the drawer and I wrote it in the shift notes, the way I write everything. 210A ice machine, dispensed old brass key, fob number 117, no ice for room 9. Gave from office freezer. Machine still noisy. I write everything down. It's a habit from a lifetime of jobs where the only thing that protects you is the note you made at the time. That habit is the reason I can tell you all of this in order. I have the notes. I've read them so many times the ink's gone soft. In the morning, I asked Carol about 117. She was doing the day handoff, counting the drawer, and she didn't look up. She said the rooms just skip. It's a builder thing. Some motels skip 13. This one skips 17. I said ours doesn't skip 17. We have a 118. She said then it's a 117 thing. Some superstition. Who knows? Ask Roy. I said, where's the key hook for it? She said there isn't one. I said there used to be. There's a gap. And Carol did look up then, and she gave me a look. I've thought about a lot since. Not scared, not annoyed, just careful. The look you give someone who's poking at something you decided a long time ago not to poke at. She said, leave the board alone, it's fine. And she went back to counting. I'd have let it go. I want that on the record too. I'm not a curious man by nature. Curiosity at night shift gets you nothing but overtime. I'd have written it off and thrown the key in the lost and found box with the phone chargers and the single earrings. But 3 nights later, the machine gave me another one. This one said 122, and 122 is a real room. It came out the same way, the full batch rattle, the dump, and then the flat clack of metal instead of the hiss of ice. Wet, cold, frost, melting. The fob for 122 wasn't burned, just old and scuffed. And here's the thing that turned my stomach the first time. The thing I keep coming back to, 122 was occupied that night. I'd checked in the man myself around midnight, and a trucker, paid cash, wanted a room on the end away from the highway. His key, the electronic card, because 122 has one of the new locks, was in his pocket. I'd watched him take it. So there was no reason on earth for a brass key to 122 to exist, because 122 hadn't used a brass key since before they redid the locks. And yet the fob was warm on one side, not cold, warm like it had been held. I went and stood outside 122. The light was off. I could hear the trucker's TV low through the door, some late night rerun. Everything normal. I told myself everything was normal, and I went back to the office and put the 122 key in the drawer next to the 117 key, and I wrote it down, and my handwriting on that note is worse than usual. I can see where the pen pressed too hard. After that, they came regularly, not every night. It settled into a pattern, and the pattern is what finally broke me, because a ghost doesn't have a pattern. A ghost is a feeling. This was a system. The machine only ever gave a key after 2 a.m. Never before. I started keeping track of the exact times, and they clustered between 2 and about 3:40, and it took me a while to see this is the window when the fewest guests are awake and moving. It was as if the machine waited for the lobby of the night to empty out before it did its business. The keys were always wet, always cold at first, and each key meant something. That was the part that took the longest to understand, and the part I most wish I hadn't. I started matching the room numbers against the old paper registries. Roy keeps them all, going back decades, in banker's boxes in the office closet, because his father never threw away a piece of paper and Roy never threw away anything of his father's. I'd never had a reason to open those boxes. Now I had all the reasons. On the slow nights, and they were mostly slow, I went through them by the light of the desk lamp, page after page of guests who'd passed through the blue vista and gone on to wherever people go. Every key the machine gave me matched a room that had something in its history. 122, I found it eventually was the room where a man had a heart attack in 1994 and was found 2 days later because the Do Not Disturb tag was still on the door and nobody wanted to bother a paying guest. Room 108 came out one night, and 108 was where a woman had left a child sleeping and driven off and never come back. The registry had a note in Roy's father's handwriting. Child collected by county June 12th, balance unpaid. Room 115 came out, and 115 had a line through the guest's name and the word deceased and a date. The machine wasn't giving me random keys. It was giving me the rooms where the checkout never really finished, where somebody left something behind that a room can't clean out with bleach and a vacuum, and more than any other. It gave me 117. The 117 key came back 4 times over about 2 months, more than any real room, and 117, as far as the building was concerned, did not exist. So I finally did the thing I'd been avoiding. I asked Alma. Alma doesn't work nights, but she comes in early before Carol to start the linens. And one morning, I stayed past my shift and made her a coffee from the lobby pot, which tastes burnt. No matter what you do, it's a law of that machine. And I put the 117 key on the little folding table where she sorts towels, and I didn't say anything. I just put it down where she'd see it. She stopped folding. She looked at the key for a long time. Then she looked at me and she said, "Where'd you get that?" I told her the truth. I told her the machine gave it to me. And I braced for her to tell me I was tired or drinking or crazy. She didn't. She sat down, which Alma never does, and she wrapped both hands around the coffee, and she told me about the fire. It was a long time ago, before Roy took over, when his father still ran the place. There was a fire in the far block of the L. The block that's newer siding now. It started in the night. Electrical, they said. Though Alma said it always smelled off to her, that the wiring in that block was no worse than anywhere else. And Roy's father had a way of making problems into insurance. It took 3 rooms before the county trucks got there. 2 of the rooms were empty. 1 wasn't. There was a guest in 117. A woman traveling alone, Alma thought, though she said she never saw her, only cleaned up after, and by the time she cleaned up after, there wasn't much to clean. The woman had checked in a few days before and paid for a week up front, cash, which was unusual enough that Roy's father remembered it, and unusual enough that it made the next part easy for him. Because when the fire report was written, the woman in 117 wasn't in it. The report said the occupied room was 118, and 118's guest had gotten out fine a salesman who'd smelled smoke and run. So the official story was that everyone got out. 3 rooms burned, no one hurt, insurance paid. Roy's father rebuilt the block 1 room shorter and slid the numbers so that 117 simply stopped being. He put a soda machine where the door had been. And the woman who paid cash for a week and only used a few days of it, she was never checked out. There was no one to check her out. Her balance, if you want to think of it that way, was never settled. She paid for time she didn't get to use, and the motel took the money. and the record of her closed over like water over a stone. Alma said Roy's father used to say the room paid for itself. She said he thought it was funny. I asked her why she was telling me. She said because I'd found the key, and because she was old, and because she'd spent 30 years walking past that soda machine, and some mornings, early, before anyone else was in, she could hear the ice machine running when it was unplugged for cleaning. She said Denny had felt it too, which is why Denny won't service the machine anymore, and why Roy has to call a company from 2 towns over. She said that room never got to leave. Roy's daddy took its number so it couldn't check out, so it's been trying to check other people in ever since. That's all it knows how to do. I thought that was grief talking. An old woman making a shape out of a bad memory. I still half thought that. Then the guest in room 9, a different guest. Weeks later, a young couple passing through came to the office at 2:30 in the morning, and the woman was upset in a way that people at that hour usually aren't. Quiet upset, and she said, "There's someone already in our room." I said I'd check. I figured a mix-up, a double booking, though we hadn't been near full. I brought the master and we walked over and I knocked, and there was no answer. And I let us in and the room was empty. Bed still made from housekeeping. Nobody. The woman stood in the doorway and would not come in. She said when they'd gotten back from the diner, their key hadn't worked the card. So her boyfriend had gone to the office, except I hadn't seen him. And while he was gone, she'd looked through the window. And there was a woman sitting on the end of the bed in the dark, just sitting, facing the bathroom. And then the boyfriend came back with a brass key, an old one, and said the guy at the desk gave it to him. And I need you to understand that I was the guy at the desk, and I had not left the office, and we do not give out brass keys to rooms with card locks. And the key he was holding when they walked back up, he handed it to me right there. Shaking the key he was holding, said 117. They didn't stay. I refunded the card, which failed. So I refunded cash out of the drawer and ate the difference myself and never told Roy. I put the 117 key with the others. 5 now. And on the security monitor on camera 3, the machine room camera, I went back through the footage from that night in the little jumping frames, and there was a stretch around 2:20 where the timestamp skips from 2:19 to 2:34 with nothing in between. 15 minutes gone. And in the frame right before the skip, there's a shape in the machine room doorway that isn't a guest and isn't me. It's just a paleness, a smear the camera couldn't hold. And in the frame right after the skip, the bucket under the chute, which I know I'd left on the shelf, is sitting on the floor under the chute. Set there, waiting. I started doing things I'm not proud of. I stopped giving people rooms in the far block near the soda machine, told them those were being painted. I unplugged the ice machine one night at midnight, pulled the cord clean out of the wall, and stood there in the dark. And at 2:26 it dumped a batch and gave me a key, cord still in my hand, not plugged into anything. And the sound it made was the full silverware drawer rattle, even though it could not have been making ice. The key was 117. It was warm that time. Warm all the way through like it had been carried a long way. Here's the part where I have to tell you about the choice. Because everyone who's heard this asks the same thing. Why didn't you just leave? Quit. Walk out. And the honest answer is the ugly one. I needed the money. And by then I also needed to know. There's a kind of person who can walk away from an unfinished thing, and a kind who can't. And the night shift is full of the second kind. But it wasn't only that, it was the receipts. Because somewhere in there, the front office printer, the little thermal one that prints the card receipts, started printing on its own. always after 2. It would chatter to life and spit out a checkout receipt, final balance, thank you for staying for room 117. Yes, name blank. And the dates on those receipts were wrong. The check-in date was decades old, the night of the fire, and the checkout date was blank over and over, pending where the date should be until one night it wasn't blank. One night the receipt printed with a checkout date on it, and the date was that night's date, and the balance said paid, and I hadn't touched a thing. And that night, for the first time, the machine gave me a key that wasn't 117 or any room I'd ever found in the registry. It gave me a key with a fob that said, in Roy's father's old stamped letters, office, the master, a cold, wet copy of the key I had on my own belt. And I understood, standing there in the machine room at 3 a.m. with the tide line brown on the wall behind me and the tube lights strobing, that the system had finished with 117. It had checked her out, the balance was settled, and now it was moving down the list. Now it was working on the rest of us who never leave. Alma, who's been there 30 years, Roy, who inherited a debt he pretends not to know about, and me, the man who works nights because he has nowhere he'd rather be, who found the key and kept it and wrote it all down and stayed. So I made my choice. I'm not going to tell you it was brave. I took all 5 117 keys and the office key out of the drawer, and I walked to the far block, to the soda machine bolted over where the door used to be, and I found the newer siding, and low on the wall behind the machine where nobody looks, there was a keyhole. An old brass keyhole in a door frame that officially isn't there, painted over so many times it was just a dimple in the paint, until I found it with my fingers. And the 117 key fit. Of course it fit. I didn't open it all the way. I want to be clear about that, because people imagine some big scene, and there wasn't one. I turned the key and I felt the bolt give, and the door came off the frame maybe an inch, and out of that inch came cold, real cold, machine cold, the cold of the ice chute and the smell of smoke and wet carpet, and under it faint, a smell like a person, like somebody's hair. And I could hear through that inch of dark the ice machine running, except the ice machine was 40 feet behind me in the other block, and I could hear it in front of me too, in the burned room, running the same rattle at the same time, like the sound was coming from both places, because in some way the machine and the room are the same thing. A system for holding people, one that freezes them and one that burns them, and neither one lets you check out. I didn't go in. I closed the door and I turned the key back and I left it in the lock. I left all of them there hanging, and I walked back to the office and I sat down, and I did not write it in the notes. And that's the only night in 2 years I didn't write it down, because some things you don't want a record of, even for yourself. I still work there. That's the part people don't like. They want me to say I quit, that I got out, that I'm calling from somewhere far away. I'm not. I couldn't afford to leave, and by now I don't think leaving is the point. The keys stopped for a while after that night. The printer went quiet. Alma retired that spring, and I bought her a card, and she wrote back one line. Glad it's sleeping, don't wake it. And for months, it slept. But it's an old machine and it doesn't stay fixed. Denny never comes. The tide line's still on the wall. And 2 weeks ago, on a dead Tuesday with rain drying on the lot and the V flickering out front, the machine ran its full batch rattle at 2:31 in the morning. And I heard the flat clack of metal in the bucket instead of the hiss of ice. And I went out with a feeling in my stomach like the floor of an elevator. And I hit the paddle, and it gave me a key. The fob wasn't burned, it was new. The plastic was still shiny, still had that just cut edge. And the number stamped on it was a room we have, a real room, one with a card lock, one that shouldn't have a brass key at all. It was warm on one side, and under the number, where the fobs usually just say the room, someone had stamped a date, tomorrow's date, and the room number on the fob was the one I check into on my nights off, when I'm too tired to drive back to town and the Roy lets me crash in an empty one. It was my room, and the checkout printer behind me in the office had already started to chatter.